Now, after doing an amazing job keeping Baby Yoda, or the child, secret before the Season 1 premiere and pretty much everything else from that first season, we have yet another leak or report coming out about a character that will be in Season 2 of The Mandalorian, going along with the previous reports that Ahsoka and Boba Fett will be in there as well. This time reports are saying that Bo-Katan will be showing up in Season 2, played by none other than Katie Sackhoff, who voiced her in both Clone Wars and Rebels, which I think is awesome news all around, because not only is Bo-Katan a great character, voiced brilliantly by Katie Sackhoff, but she very much looks like Bo-Katan and has played, you could say, similar roles in live action and played them extremely well, with Starbuck in the newer version of Battlestar Galactica being one such example. And though this news is not confirmed by Lucasfilm, it's not too much of a surprise to learn she's likely going to be in there, considering we saw Moff Gideon with the Darksaber at the end of the last episode of Season 1, and last we saw the Darksaber before that, Bo-Katan was taking it from Sabine in Rebels, and basically becoming the new leader of the Mandalorians. So it stands to reason we'll either see Bo-Katan in flashback and how she lost the Darksaber, which almost certainly happens during this great purge we heard so much about in Season 1, or she's going to show up and try to reclaim it from Moff Gideon, and will likely team up with the Mandalorian, who has made an enemy of Moff Gideon himself. Not to mention, he'd likely be willing to help the rightful heir or leader of the Mandalorians, or maybe will begrudgingly do it. One way or the other, I think the common enemy in Moff Gideon will bring these two characters together. Furthermore, Bo-Katan being in there could also explain why we'll see Ahsoka, because these two obviously have history together, as we see in the Siege of Mandalore arc from the Clone Wars. And the way they parted in that arc, to me, said they will indeed see each other again someday. Though it's also possible that Ahsoka shows up separate from any and all of that, and has something to do with the continuation of Baby Yoda's story. Perhaps she's even the one who takes him home or back to his people. Or she could take him to Luke to see if he can or should be trained as a Jedi. It would be kind of cool to see Luke, who was once trained by Yoda, now training this child that we all like to refer to as Baby Yoda. Though if that is the case, the glaring question would be, what happens to Baby Yoda when Luke's Jedi Order falls some 20 years later? One way or another, obviously, I think Ahsoka, assuming the reports of her being in Season 2 are true, will meet up with the Mandalorian and see Baby Yoda, and will likely know exactly what he is and will suggest a course of action. And though some disagree or hate when I say this, I do think Baby Yoda's arc will conclude in Season 2, and Ahsoka in some respect will be the one who brings it to a close. The fact that Bo-Katan will be in there, meaning this show may very well be increasing in scope and scale, to me says the odds of Baby Yoda and his relationship with the Mandalorian continuing to be a main fixture is pretty low. And though I love Baby Yoda as much as the next fan, don't get me wrong, they've also almost painted themselves into a corner with the character, because what do you do with him now? They've basically established that he matures extremely slowly, that after 50 years he's still roughly a toddler, I'd say, which means it's going to be hard to really do much with the character beyond what he did or what they did with him in the first season, or to explain how he might suddenly grow or mature to some degree and become something more than what he currently is. One of the only ways I could see that being done is if he's a clone, maybe a clone of Yoda himself, and the opposite of what was done to the clone troopers was done to him, that instead of accelerating his aging, they slowed it down somehow. Perhaps that's even the point. Perhaps, and let's get crazy here for a moment, maybe he's an experiment of Plagueis, who, of course, was trying to find the key to immortality, and he thought Yoda's species was somehow the key. So yes, something interesting can still certainly be done with him. There still might be a story to tell there, but as it stands right now, Baby Yoda, along with being adorable, was basically meant to be the catalyst for change within The Mandalorian. Now that that's happened, something else really would need to be done with him, some sort of progression for the character, or something crazy like Guy suggested. Otherwise, he's just going to continue to be in there for the sake of being adorable, mostly. And though that's not necessarily a problem or a bad thing, and many would be fine with that, it could eventually become tiresome and wear out its welcome. Anyway, moving on now, another character I could see showing up in Season 2 of The Mandalorian would be Sabine Wren. She has a connection to both Bo-Katan and Ahsoka. In fact, last time we saw Ahsoka, she was going off with Sabine to find Ezra at the end of Rebels. And though I don't think this show will have anything to do with that adventure, though it may hint at it, I suppose, it is interesting to see how many threads are seemingly being picked up from the Clone Wars and Rebels, and now woven into this show. And I'm by no means opposed to that idea. I actually think it's pretty clever to do this because it encourages fans of those previous shows to now watch this one, as if they needed encouragement, and perhaps convinces newer fans who haven't seen the Clone Wars or Rebels to go back and watch them, to turn them into bigger fans and to keep them sort of hooked. It also creates this sort of other saga that runs parallel to the main Star Wars or Skywalker saga, which I also find an interesting idea. I guess the question, and I may turn this into a poll question, is this what the fans want out of this show? I think we were led to believe The Mandalorian would more or less stand on its own, that it would be its own separate story. Now sure, it would be in a very recognizable time period being set shortly after Return of the Jedi, and there would almost certainly be some familiar characters showing up here and there. But there are some pretty big named characters that will be showing up in Season 2, and as I said, more than likely, they'll be threading their own stories or previous stories from other shows into this one, and this show may be carrying them forward to some extent. And though again, I'm not against that idea, I wonder if others out there think this is the formula they should use or embrace going forward with Star Wars. Should they more or less try to keep a tight overall narrative where things from previous shows or movies sort of ebb and flow into the new ones that come out? Or do they need to cut ties with this time period altogether and explore new and different things? And if you go too different, is it even Star Wars anymore? I mean, what even makes Star Wars Star Wars? I don't think it's an easy question to answer, but it's certainly more than just being set in the same galaxy as those first movies. It's something far more, as a matter of fact. So one could ask, what exactly is the point of doing something so detached from everything else that we know and is familiar, that it, at best, feels vaguely familiar, but is otherwise something different altogether, that just so happens to be set in the same galaxy as Star Wars? And I know some will say, well, why not try both? And we've certainly been told that shows or movies taking us to new times and places in the galaxy are coming. We even have the High Republic era coming, though since those will only be books and comics, it's likely only going to appeal to the more hardcore fans who already read or get into those mediums. So again, why not do both with the movies and or shows? And that does seem to be their plan, assuming all these announced projects do indeed see the light of day. The only risk I see is it confusing the more casual fans or average viewers if you just literally jump all over time and space with these different stories. I mean, there are some out there who have trouble understanding when The Mandalorian takes place, yet most fans, without being told, can very, very quickly put together we're set somewhere shortly after Return of the Jedi, after just a few minutes of watching the show. And so balancing this is always going to be the tricky part of running, if you will, a semi-continuous story, especially over the course of many years and or many shows and movies. The larger the story, the more daunting it looks to new people trying to get into said story. Because you'll always have those who have seen it and know it all, who don't want to be introduced to Star Wars every time a new show starts up, who just want things to pick up and continue. The Force Awakens, for example, feels like a reintroduction to Star Wars, not to mention a retelling of it. It doesn't feel like an episode 7 of a story, as much as it feels like a recap, or again retelling, with some mystery thrown in, as if to promise something bigger and better to come. And maybe if those mysteries had better payoffs, I'd feel differently about that movie, but the fact that they don't just makes it feel like a waste of time, a waste of a chapter in a much bigger story. And so again, there's always going to be that fine line between the two, what the hardcore fans want and expect, and what will be a good introduction for new fans. And I give credit to the first season of The Mandalorian. I thought it did a great job of being accessible to new or newer fans, while also having a lot in there for the hardcore fans to appreciate, and keeping a tight focus on only a few characters, and primarily our main character, while subtly setting the table for bigger things down the road, was the perfect approach, I think. And assuming the scope and scale does indeed get bigger, it will be curious to see how newer or less knowledgeable fans, or those who haven't seen Clone Wars and Rebels in particular, react to Season 2, as these characters and previous story threads are quite likely picked up there. Now, the massive success of a show like Game of Thrones gives me hope and belief that your average viewer can handle and enjoys a lot thrown at them when the story is interesting and the characters are good. That show trusted its audience, which I liked. And so if The Mandalorian is going to become this bigger show, if it is going to include more characters, larger, more complex overall stories, and so on, I hope it too trusts its audience. I hope going forward, it can continue to be something both new and old fans enjoy. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think about all this. And again, I may try to do a poll or two on this topic depending on how much interest there is. Either way, let me know what you think the future of Star Wars should look like. Continue to build on the known, or take us to the unknown? Or do you think both could work? Whatever the case may be, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.